The Acolyte is dead. The Acolyte season 2 has been canceled. It is not being picked up for a second season after a really horrible finale to the Acolyte season 1. All right. And so we're going to take a look at this article that kind of goes through some of the reasons. We're also going to be, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts, reacting to it. So the Acolyte is dead. Star Wars series won't return for season 2. Right. So it just explains a little bit about what the Acolyte is. If you guys don't know, this was a Star Wars story that is supposed to take place 100 years before the Phantom Menace. If you've seen any of our channel before, we have a ton of videos on the Acolyte. We did review videos weekly as it was being rolled out, and this got pretty heated. I'll be honest with you. The Star Wars world got really up in arms around the Acolyte. Yeah, so the news comes in once as a shock, given how much of season 1 finale ended on a cliffhanger and teased several plot lines for season 2. So if you don't know what they're talking about Plagueis. They brought Plagueis in. A lot of people were like, member berries or excited to see him on screen. But the people who are actually fans of Star Wars were like, oh, this is crap. They're ruining the lore of Plagueis, the existing lore that's already there, just because you put him in a live action film, you interject him, and then it doesn't work that way. You can't just change the lore. It's disrespectful, right? And not much of a surprise given the widely opposing reception from the fans and less than robust viewership that appeared to drop off after the series premiere in June. So if you take a look at this graph, apparently Acolyte season finale scores the lowest of Star Wars ratings. So if you go down here to see, different shows and their finales from different streamers like The Boys and whatnot, the Acolyte from July 15th to July 21st, it was the lowest viewer. I mean, it was, out of all of these shows, where like Evil and Bridgerton and The Boys and Cobra Kai, there's all these different ones here. And yeah, it just didn't, it was so incredibly low. But as far as Star Wars stories go, the Acolyte's finale was viewed a total of 335 million minutes. Compare that to other Star Wars shows. So Ahsoka being the second lowest on its finale, 575 million. Andor, 674 million. Obi-Wan, 860 million minutes, 885 million minutes. A Mandalorian, because everyone was watching Mandalorian, because the first 2 seasons were really, really pretty good. So Mandalorian season 3, over 1,000, that it gets pretty big. And then Mandalorian season 2, which actually was really good, because that was probably the best ending to recent Star Wars story. So yeah, so if we go back to this article, it has the lowest viewership in the season finale. Creator Leslie Headland, an avowed Star Wars superfan, set out to create the first Star Wars story set outside of the core timeline in the franchise that stretches from The Phantom Menace to Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. And I believe there's been a theory going around online that apparently the sequel trilogy, that they're de-canonizing it. I think that is fake, but it's going around the internet for some reason right now. Let me know in the comments if you've seen that. The show follows twins Osha and May. If you guys haven't seen the show, I wouldn't recommend you do, but there's plenty of content on the channel where you can get caught up on the actual story of what this was. So let's see. So some of the fans had, they point out to some of the fans that some of the issues that fans had with it. And I think it's honestly a poor description of what it was that fans actually had a problem with. I feel like they just keep overlooking the actual issues with this, which I will explain. But the show follows the twins, Osha and May, both played by Amanda Stenberg, who were separated as children and led to believe the other had been killed. Some critics and fans loved how the show challenged the traditional perception of the Jedi as infallible and wholly virtuous, as embodied by the emotional, self-serving choices made by Jedi Master Soul. So basically, they just made this gray area for the Jedi, right? It wasn't good versus evil anymore. It was that the Jedi can be good and the dark side could have good intentions and familial bonds and all kinds of stuff. So other fans, however, felt those creative choices were antithetical to the good versus evil nature of Star Wars storytelling and strongly objected to the show's expansion of the mythology of the Force. I personally had that opinion. I don't think that this should ever have been what it became. I think it was fine being a good versus evil story because that was the original intention of it. They don't need to hit this weird gray area, right? I think that's the wrong thing for Star Wars. There's plenty of shows that do that. Keep that out of Star Wars. The Acolyte was also review bombed, an insidious practice most often employed as a form of digital protests against inclusive casts centered around actors of color and LGBTQ characters like Osha and May's mother, played by Jodie Turner-Smith, and whatever. All right, so first off, that's not the number one problem fans had with this. The characters of color, no, that's not the case. We've never had issues with characters of color in The Acolyte or in Star Wars, especially not The Acolyte. I didn't care that the characters were, characters of color, however you want to put it. Look at Mace Windu. Everybody loves Mace Windu. And Sam Jackson. There's plenty of diversity that we've been accepting of in the past of Star Wars. That is not the problem with what we had here. And then bringing in the LGBTQ characters. Look, this is a hot topic, and everyone, they're going to keep saying this. They're just going to keep saying, hey, this is the problem. All these people are bigots. They're just going to keep saying this until people maybe eventually believe it. There's already a small group of people, at least in our comment section on a few videos, that literally have said we are bigots because we didn't like The Acolyte. And that's crazy. The primary problem we have with this, my big issues, is it's putting Star Wars in a gray area. A lot of people thought that was interesting. I thought it was cheap, and I thought it was not the heart of Star Wars. Also, the writing was horrible. Nothing made sense. The character's motivation was non-existent. The dialogue was difficult to listen to. I mean, it was cringy, and the characters were unlikable through and through. There was nothing for me to get behind. And so that's why I didn't like it. That's the ultimate thing. I don't care if there's characters of color. I have seen plenty of diversity I have not even commented on, and enjoyed characters that are diverse in their race in Star Wars in the past. It has never been that. It is crazy to me. And also with the whole, these characters, Osha and May's mothers, look, get past their sexual identity and just consider the fact that they brought in witches who they wrote into the story as if they were more smart and more experienced in the Force, that they understood it was a thread instead of the Force. First off, Hollywood's obsessed with witches. It's so annoying. I hate this weird witch narrative interjected into everything. And then also, the thread? The Force existed. The Force is a big part. It surrounds us. It binds us. It holds the universe together. It is established the Force, the literal force behind nature in the Star Wars universe. So to just poo-poo all over that and call it the thread and make these witches as some kind of enlightened force or thread users where they can manipulate it to their will, that is lore breaking. It's disrespectful to the fans. It's disrespectful to George Lucas. It's disrespectful to everybody who is a part of Star Wars in the past and have sustained it and loved it and cherished it for so many years. It goes back this is multi-generational for me. My mom brought us up watching Star Wars. She went and watched the first Star Wars, A New Hope, like 5 times in the theaters, because when she watched it, she was in the generation where she was excited to see it. It was incredible to her. She couldn't get enough. She kept going back and watching it. And so we watched it at a young age. The Phantom Menace is one of the first actual like films, not like kids movies or kids shows, but actual one of the first films that I mentally remember watching as a very young kid. And it stuck with me. Although I look back and there's a lot of cringy stuff in The Phantom Menace, like Jar Jar Binks and whatnot, I love that movie. It solidified. It introduced me into the Star Wars universe, and then I watched the original trilogy. And the fact that they would just say it comes down to people being bigots and racist and review bombing, which is an insidious practice. That's how they put it. An insidious practice most often employed as a form of digital protest. Well, first off, I thought, the left-leaning side of politics and the people who are writing articles like this, I thought protests were your favorite thing. I thought you loved protests. There's a protest happening in Chicago right now at the DNC. Liberals protesting liberals. That's kind of crazy to me. But I thought protests were great. I thought you loved it. And so you're saying that it's an insidious practice of digital protesting. No, it's a bunch of people being honest that the show stinks. The show was written horribly. There's nothing interesting about these characters, and yet you're putting Star Wars in front of our faces, giving us something we never asked for when we've asked for tons of stuff, and you won't give us that. You give us something that's garbage, and then calling us names and honestly demeaning our character as a fan base because we said you screwed up. This is dumb. This is horrible to watch. It's stupid. It's as simple as that. It's stupid. You dumped a lot of money into something that was worth nothing. So, and everyone knows that. Look at the Rotten Tomatoes score. All right. I think it was like at 16%, right? It got as low as 13% at one point. Look at how many people tuned into the finale. We already went over that. It was nobody. Like, it's the lowest rated finale viewing of any Star Wars project ever in existence. And yet you have the audacity to tell us that we are wrong and racist and bigots because we didn't like the way you wrote the story, because you had people who don't know how to tell a first, second, and third act of a story, writing this nonsense tale that doesn't go along with the lore of Star Wars at all, right? That's insane to me. It's very upsetting that people just write these articles and just assume the worst of the fans when ultimately it's like the fans are they're a customer base. We're the customer base. The fans of Star Wars who are going to watch your show is the customer base. Why are you calling us names and why are you assuming the worst of us? We love shows like Mandalorian season 1 and 2. We loved Andor. People who watched it, I freaking love Andor. I think it might be the best piece of Star Wars next to the George Lucas films. Andor was really well done, written by Tony Gilroy. And yet you give us The Acolyte. The Acolyte. It was horrible, man. I don't even know what else to say outside of that. Despite the objections, The Acolyte also captured a great deal of positive reactions, especially surrounding the reveal of Manny Jinko. I guess it goes on to talk about the thirst trap and everything that, the Sith character brought to it, where the whole thing that Leslie Headland was like, oh, Obi-Wan says in A New Hope that Darth Vader was seduced by the Force. And when she was a little girl, she was like, oh, what a weird choice of words. And so she wanted to add that sexual tension of being seduced to the dark side. Weird as crap, man. I think that's the strangest use to bring into Star Wars, especially when Star Wars has always been relatively family friendly, right? The most sexual we got was Anakin waking up out of bed, after having a nightmare, and Padme's in the bed next to him, right? I think that's the most sexual we got with Star Wars, outside of obviously having children, but they were married at that point. So it's kind of like, what is this weird obsession with like shipping the dark side characters? And it's just, it's trying to force something into Star Wars that Star Wars has never been. There's plenty of other stories that are a bit more risque and have a place for the fan base who likes that. Star Wars is not the place for that. It just isn't. The Star Wars is a Skywalker saga, and there's a lot of really cool tales. I watched the trailer for Skeleton Crew that's coming out next. It's the next Star Wars project. And honestly, I feel like Skeleton Crew has potential to be kind of fun because I'm getting like Goonie vibes, you know? I'm feeling like this. It seems like an inconsequential side quest story in the Star Wars universe with a bunch of kids, and they run into some Jedi or someone who's a Force user, or who knows what the story is going to be. But I'm actually kind of interested because I don't think there's going to be any like boundary pushing like the Acolyte did to fundamentally change the lore of Star Wars. At the same time, I think it's also a really fun deviation, and it's probably going to be pretty lighthearted, like Goonies was, or these kids shows, like a lot of the Spielberg 80s films, right? And I think that's a really good move. I'm curious to see what that is. But ultimately, or season 2, that's what I'm more interested in. Skeleton Crew, I'm going to definitely watch it because I'm a fan of Star Wars and I want to watch cool Star Wars stuff. But I had to just sit through this entire Acolyte season, which was a complete garbage. And then they're calling me names like I've done something wrong. I was just honest online. I was just honest online, as well as were thousands of other people who were saying the exact same thing. The exact same thing. So thank goodness there's not going to be a season 2 of The Acolyte. Thank goodness. I think this is probably the smartest decision Disney's made in a long time. But you also can't really ignore the numbers. You can't keep sinking money into something when it doesn't profit you anything. Otherwise, they're eventually going to have no platform to push their messages onto people. So with that, let me know in the comments what you guys think about Acolyte Season 2 being not renewed or not being a thing. I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts of the whole season. And if you want to check out other videos on the channel, me and my friend Wyatt, we did a full season review of The Acolyte. You should check it out. It's on our channel. It's on this channel.